In this video, we're going to show you to install the hard brake line kit on your Jeep Grand Cherokee, running from the master cylinder all the way to all of your other wheels. Using your 19mm socket, loosen and remove your lug nuts. Once you have the lug nuts removed, grab the wheel and set it aside. Now, installing our brake line kit here, every single line has a location identification on it. Rear axle line, driver's side. So here we are at the driver's side rear. And you always want to make sure that it's the correct one, line it up. And ours looks pretty good. So let's go ahead and start to loosen the nuts here. This is a 3/8 here and over at the junction box. And we did spray these down with some rust penetrant. Now, if something should happen to this line, it shouldn't matter because, well, we're replacing the whole thing anyways, and our line was rusted. That's why we're replacing these. You are going to lose some brake fluid here. So have a catch can or a bucket underneath. Unthread that, and let's go to the other side. I'm going to loosen this here. Our flare nut here doesn't want to loosen from that line, so that may break as well, but it's okay. Line up the brake line. Now you always want to get these started by hand. You can wiggle the brake line around a little bit. Start this by hand, never by a wrench. Get that started. We'll go on to the other side over here. Get that line put in and do the same here. Snug that in there gently. And then we'll go to the other side. And we'll snug that in. And once you feel that bottom seated is pretty firm, give it just a little bit more. Just want to make sure that it's snug. Give that a wipe down here and do the same for the other side. You're just going to come back to that. So it's seated. Give it a little bit more. Go ahead and wipe everything down. We're going to spray it with some solvent. Now, after you've sprayed it with the solvent, just give everything a wipe down. Do this for both sides. Once you've sprayed everything down and wiped it, inspect for any leaks. Before we go on to the next line, we're going to go ahead and lower the vehicle, top off the master cylinder with brake fluid because we do not want air to go into the master cylinder. So we'll top off the fluid there, then want to come back and continue to the next line. Now we're replacing the passenger side rear brake line, the hard brake line, and that joins us right here at this union. This is a 3/8. We'll go ahead and break this free. Now we did spray it down with some rust penetrant. We have a catch can underneath to catch fluid. Now ideally you want to, get that line to stay stable while you undo the nut here, but because we're replacing it, it doesn't matter if this hard brake line twists and breaks on us because we're replacing it anyways. And that's exactly what happened. On the back side here, we're going to find our flex line on the top coming down to our hard line. You can try and wiggle these a little bit, get them to break free, but in most cases, or in our case, these lines are going to just snap on us. There it is, our line broke. Want to make sure you can run your brake line over to the other side. You want to get this line started first. You always want to start these by hand. Now I have this started. I'm not going to tighten it. I am going to run the nut in though. I want to get that in quite a bit, but yet I want to leave that line loose so I have adjustability at the other end to move this line up and down and side to side. Now this line is snug. Now what I want to do is follow the brake line over onto the axle. And there is a bracket right here to secure this. So what I'll do is I'll pull this down and we'll just tap this down with a hammer just to hold that in place. Check this line, follow this line all the way around, make sure that there's no friction points. It is spaced away from everything. We don't want to have anything rub through. Check it all the way over the differential into the junction block in the middle. I'm going to go ahead and tighten this here. And we're going to repeat the same process as the other line here. Tighten down the other side, spray everything down with our solvent, check for leaks. Now on the main section line here, it's going to have two tags here and it's going to show you a shipping bend and you need to straighten out this line. So you're just going to do this by hand. You're going to grab that line and you're going to use your thumbs and just apply a little bit of pressure and just kind of roll out that bend and then do that other side. And get it as straight as possible. And there you have it. Now this is ready to go ahead and line up and get this installed. Now underneath our vehicle, the main line that comes from the master cylinder area all the way back to the back wheel is one line from the factory. Our particular line is going to be two lines. It makes it easier for us to install. Now we have this one here and our tag on it says rear feed, rear section. So this is the one that goes to the back of the vehicle. This end right here is the one that attaches to the rear flex line area. And this is going to run along the frame. Now as we come to the other end of it right here, we need to connect this line here, which is labeled rear feed front section. So this upper section is going to go up to the master cylinder. This section here needs to attach here. In order to do so, we're going to use this union here and we would join these underneath the vehicle. What we have to do first, before we even install any of this stuff here, is we're going to take this front line, go to the engine compartment, drop this down to where it needs to be, and just get it in this preliminary area. Then we'll join these two lines together loosely using our union, and then we'll follow this line back and install the tail section. So we're going to install our line here, drop that down. It's going to go just to the left of our master cylinder here, but just to the right of all these vacuum lines here. It's going to go to the right of our steering shaft. And you basically just need to finagle this down, feed this down. Do the best you can to get that routed. You're going to see plastic retainer clips down below where this will be put into its final resting place. All right, we have our line set up here. It's coming just to the general ear on the top of our ABS module right here. We're just going to leave this hanging out right here, and let's go down underneath, install the back half of the line with the union. Now underneath here on the driver's side, inside of the unibody frame here, you can see a series of lines. The top skinny one is going to be the brake line, and it's held in place by a series of 4 plastic retainer clips. Now we're not going to pop out the other line yet. We're going to go ahead and feed our line up into place. Let's see if we can feed this up to the front first. And then we'll feed our back in over here just to get it in our preliminary area. Now let's go up to the front section. Go ahead and join our front section of the line to the rear section of the line with this union. Now I'm just going to go ahead and thread this on by hand. I'll bring the other line over, bring this up, and attach this line here. Now at this point, we're going to go ahead and go to the back of the vehicle. We're going to go ahead and disconnect the hard line back there and connect the new line to the back. Then when I come over here, I'm going to go right to this midsection here, snug this up a little bit, and then we're going to go up top and install the upper portion of the line. Once both ends are connected, we're going to come down, remove the old hard line from all the clips, and install our new line in the correct location. You're going to use your 3/8. Now if your line is rusty or crusty, it might take a little bit of effort to go ahead and remove that. But we're replacing the line, so it doesn't matter if that line breaks. We just need to remove this fitting from the center flex line here. You definitely want to get these started by hand first. And once that's caught, you can go ahead and snug that down. And we just installed a little rubber cap on here to keep that fluid from coming out. Now right here at our union, we're going to use a 12mm on the union itself and our 3/8, and we're going to snug this line. We do want to seat this here. Now this might need an adjustment afterwards. You might have to loosen it just to let the line relax. But what we want to do is when we open up that line up top and reconnect the new line, we don't want to have a constant leak right in the middle here. On the inside of our frame rail, we're going to unclip the old line. So we're going to use a small pry tool here to go ahead and open up this clip and work the old line out. Then we'd use a 12mm wrench to go ahead and loosen this fitting here. You want to be prepared. You may lose some brake fluid through the line. We have some leaking out now, so we just have a towel here to catch any residual fluid. All right, go ahead and pull that up and out. Go ahead and remove the old lines from the vehicle. You want to go ahead and clean up the top here. And once you have the new line up in here ready to go, lower that down into position. You want to go ahead and start threading that nut into place. You want to make sure you have that threaded in several threads before you put the wrench on it, because you don't want to cross thread it. By wiggling the line around a little bit, it does help that nut spin in a little bit without resistance. You want to go ahead and make sure that's good and tight. Then use your rag and go ahead and clean that up. Now that we have our old line out, let's go ahead and pop our new line into the retainer clip. And we're going to do this right down the inside of the frame rail. On the front side, on the inside of the driver's side frame rail here, we have the driver's side front hard line coming down to our flex hose area here. This is a 3/8. I'm going to continue this process. I'll loosen this. Well, our line is just twisting and it's going to break off. Not a big issue. Now, if you have a rubber plug, go ahead and pop it over that line. Once this is disconnected, we're going to move up top and remove the line from up top. Now, the driver's side front wheel hard line comes up to this hose right here, or this line. I would use a 12mm wrench to go ahead and loosen this fitting here. Just do your best to finagle that old line out. Sometimes you just go along and you can cut pieces out of it to make it easier. That's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and snip this line. Now what we're going to do is gently persuade our line down. You want to make sure that it gets routed in the correct locations. Now these other lines here we're going to be replacing as well. So it is okay for you, if you have to manipulate these lines out of the way. Now the front brake line here needs to come down on the other side of our fuel lines right here. In order to do that, we're going to have to pop our fuel lines out of the plastic retainer clips on the frame. So we just need to kind of open up these locking tabs. I'm using a small pry bar and a smaller pry bar to open this up and pop these lines out. So with those lines having a little bit more flexibility, we can push that upper brake line up and over the top. You can see that line dropping down in a position here. Now that we have the line in its general vicinity where it needs to go, we are going to go up top, install that top portion of the line, come back down and install this here. Because once we get that top lined up and threaded in, this should pretty much fall right into place here. And go ahead and start our nut here by hand. thread that down as far as you can, and then we'll snug that down. Make sure that's good and tight. Right here we have a retainer. Once we get that bottom line installed, we'll snap that down into the frame clips that we have down below. And then we'll move on to our next line. And once you get this caught, we'll go ahead and snug this down. And snug that line down. Now on the passenger side, right beside our lower control arm, if you follow it up, the hard line meets with our flex hose right here. Now this is a very compact area. This is going to be the toughest one that is going to be in this kit to gain access to. You have your exhaust just to the side of it here, and then the frame over here. To make things a little bit easier for us, we're simply going to cut the line. That is going to allow for us to get our wrench up in there, spin that nut off without having any brake line twisting or resistance. This is a 3/8. Now our brake line runs across the back firewall all the way over from our ABS module on the driver's side, up across underneath the seal, and it comes down and goes down on the passenger side of the engine and down to that flex hose. Now for us to get this out easy peasy, we're going to cut it into pieces. Might require a couple different cuts. Basically, we just need to try and finagle this thing up and out. Might cut a certain piece here, a little in a different location, and then feed it back down through the bottom. We're just gonna snip this here. Finagle that out for now, just to get this out. And let's follow this over to the driver's side. Let's pop out our line here. Let's go ahead and unbolt it from our ABS. Now this line here is actually using a 10 millimeter. Remove that. Just gonna put a rag down around this here. Try and absorb any of that brake fluid that's coming up and out. Be careful not to drip this on the paint of your vehicle. Now this line here, it is listed as front line to passenger side ABS unit. So going to the ABS unit, it's going to go up across to the passenger side. I just popped that up into the back clip on the firewall area. That'll help us line that up here and get that nut started. Now our new line, this is actually a 12 millimeter. Just giving that a wipe down. I'm gonna feed our brake line through the top. I'm gonna go behind the harness. And we're gonna just kind of rotate around. And what we have to do is we have to manipulate this down and around and get it to the left of the heater hoses down on the firewall, but to the right of the AC lines going into the firewall there. Now at this point, our brake line is down right at the top of the frame rail, but because of the bends in the line, we can't get our hand on there to pull that through. So we have a pry bar, and we're going to gently get behind that line. And we're going to try and manipulate this line to get on the other side. And try and push the line down and push it over with the pry bar. Then we're going to loosen this nut, so that's going to allow us to wiggle this harness around a little bit using a 10mm socket. Got to remove that. It should allow us a little bit more leniency here with this line. Now, using that pry bar, we're able to pop that line down and direct it on the other side of the frame rail. Now we just need to rotate our line to get this around the hoses. Make sure that everything is not, make sure that nothing is hitting somewhere, hitting or binding on the exhaust or the starter. Now we're going to join the two lines up top. We're going to use our union here. We do want to make sure that this is good and snug here. Now, when installing the line, you may have done a little tweaks or bends here and there. It's totally fine. There's going to be no issues with the line itself, but like you can see here, we're going to line these two up and it's not lining up a little bit. So you're just going to grab these lines a little bit and just tweak them by hand just a little bit to get them to line up. I'm going to install our bracket here for the harness before we go down below. Let's go ahead and install the line down below. Once we do that there, we're going to come back up top, pop in our clip here, and then we'll continue on to our next line. Now let's install our lower line here. Now you might have to tweak it or wiggle it around or get it to line up just right. Get that line popped in and then get that nut started by hand. Make sure you get it in several threads before you try and tighten this. If you cross thread something, again, it's going to be a much more challenging job to repair that stuff. Make sure it's good and tight. You're going to follow this line up top, pop the line into that plastic clip, and then we'll install the next line. On the side of our master cylinder, we're going to remove this connector. We're just going to push in on the top tab, wiggle that off, and set that off to the side. That's going to give us some better swinging room with our wrench on here. Now, on this particular unit, this is a 10mm. I don't believe it's correct because these lines have been replaced before. I just broke that free. It should be a 12mm. You want to come over to the ABS module unit, and that is this back line right over here. Use a 13mm wrench on our ABS module. Now I might lose a little bit of fluid out of this here. I'm just going to manipulate that line because it's tight up against our OEM replacement lines there. Now we do have a rag there to catch any residual brake fluid that might come out. Remove that line, feed our line through. I'm going to line this up with the master cylinder. I'm going to run this nut in a little bit, but we're not going to tighten it yet. We want to keep this line a little flexible. Let's go to the other end and get that threaded into the ABS. And the same thing here, I might have to tweak this line just a little bit. And this here is our 13 millimeter, and we're using a 12 millimeter on the master cylinder side. Tighten up this line. Disconnect the front line. We're going to do the same as we did for the rear. Let's move that rag forward. Now remember, when doing this here, you want to keep that brake fluid from getting on your paint. You want to make sure that these are good and tight, but not enough where you're going to crack or damage anything. I'm going to install our sensor harness here. And remove our rag here, and we're going to spray down our connections with some solvent. Wipe everything down. With all of our lines hooked up, go ahead and top off the fluid. We're going to hop into the vehicle. We're going to start it up, pump up the brakes, and we'll continue to our brake bleeding process. Right above the flex hose here is going to be the bleeder bolt, and there's a little cap over this here. So you can just grab that cap. We're going to pop that off. Now the bleeder screw is a 10 millimeter. We're going to put our wrench on there and loosen that. Now the purpose of doing this here is we're going to do a gravity bleed on our brakes. We're going to go ahead and allow for the brake fluid to come through the backside of the piston and come out through this bleeder here. And once it starts coming out, we'll go ahead and tighten this down. We're going to hop in the vehicle, pump up the brakes, make sure we have a solid pedal. Now if you have a spongy pedal, you would now want to go ahead and proceed to a full brake bleed on the brake system. But if your pedal is nice and firm, you can go ahead and take it for a test ride after you put your wheel on. There's the fluid there. Go ahead and snug this down. And once that screw bottom's out, you want to give it just a little bit more. You want to make it snug, but not super, super tight. Give it a good wipe. Clean up any of the residual fluid that had gotten anywhere. Go ahead and reinstall the little plastic cap on there. Okay, grab your wheel, line it up onto the studs, set it into place. We want to go ahead and install our lug nuts. Going to get them all started by hand first. Once we have these all started by hand, we'll come back and snug them down. Torque the lug nuts to 100 foot-pounds.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.